Before the sun had even begun to rise on that cold February morning of 1853, the Whitford plantation lay under a blanket of fog so thick it blurred the line between earth and sky. Roosters had not yet crowed, the field hands had not been summoned by the overseer's bell, and even the dogs, usually restless long before dawn, were silent in their kennels. It was the kind of eerie quiet that made the world feel suspended, as if everything held its breath at once, and somewhere inside that suspended moment, Eleanor Whitford was making a decision that would sever her from her family, her home, and the life she had known for 18 years. She stood by her bedroom window, hands trembling not from cold but from the gravity of what she was about to do. Everyone believed Eleanor to be the fragile sort, quiet, obedient, too gentle for the harsh realities around her. They did not know the countless nights she lay awake listening to the distant echoes of cracking whips, or the muffled cries from the slave quarters carried by wind across the cotton fields. They did not know how every scream seeped into her bones like poison she could not purge. Her father always said she was too sensitive, too easily shaken, but she had learned to hide her reactions behind lowered lashes and perfectly folded hands. Sensitivity was not weakness. It was pressure building beneath the surface, pressure that would one day break through. That day was now. She had already exchanged her delicate dresses for simple traveling clothes, a heavy brown cloak, a thick skirt, and worn boots she had taken from a trunk in the attic. A bonnet lay on the bed, one she had never worn before. She did not intend to take anything that could be recognized. No jewelry, no embroidered cloth, nothing that tied her to the Whitford name. She took only a small bag with water, a loaf of bread, a knife wrapped in cloth, and a folded map Samuel had given her 2 nights before. Samuel, the thought of him steadied her and frightened her at once. He had been on the plantation for as long as she could remember. He was not the loudest, not the strongest, not the kind that defied authority openly, but he was the one who watched instead of merely saw, the one who listened with intention. Her father once said Samuel was too quiet to trust, because quiet men were the ones who stored knowledge like seeds waiting for the right season to sprout. Eleanor had never told Samuel that she agreed with her father, just not in the way he thought. Quiet men were dangerous only to those who feared truth. Her breath fogged the cold glass as she stared into the darkness outside. Somewhere beyond the fog, Samuel waited. They had chosen a clearing near the old pecan tree, a place where the horses rarely grazed and where the overseer seldom walked. In the dense dark, no one would see them leave. A faint knock at her bedroom door snapped her out of her thoughts. She froze, but then she heard the soft and hesitant voice of Mary, the housemaid who had been assigned to Eleanor since childhood. "Miss Ellie, you awake?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "Yes, Mary? Come in." Mary entered, her expression worried. "Your room light was moving. I thought maybe you were sick." Eleanor forced a small smile. "No, just couldn't sleep." Mary looked at her cloak, then at the boots. Her eyes narrowed with a caution that came from a lifetime of being punished for knowing too much. "You going somewhere so early?" For a moment Eleanor considered lying. Instead, she stepped closer and took Mary's hands gently. "Mary, you have always been kind to me. You've kept my secrets more times than I can count. I need you to keep one more." Mary's breath hitched, fear, recognition, suspicion, all mixing at once. "Miss Ellie, what are you doing?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "Leaving." Mary jerked her hands back. "Leaving? You? With who? You ain't safe out there alone." Eleanor shook her head. "I won't be alone." The silence stretched between them until realization dawned in Mary's eyes. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "You going with him? With Samuel?" Eleanor nodded once. Mary stepped back, fear twisting her features. "If they find out, Miss Ellie, they'll kill him. And your daddy will drag you back in chains if he has to." "I know. And you still going?" Eleanor met her gaze without wavering. "Yes." Mary's breath shook. For a moment she looked torn between duty and compassion, between fear and the instinct to protect the girl she had helped raise. Finally she stepped forward and tied Eleanor's cloak with trembling fingers. "Then go fast," she whispered, "and don't look back, no matter what you hear." Eleanor let out a shaky exhale. "Thank you." Mary opened the bedroom door just enough for Eleanor to slip through. As Eleanor stepped into the hall, she heard Mary whisper one last thing. "I hope the world is kinder to you out there than it ever was in here." Eleanor moved silently down the stairs, avoiding the boards that creaked. In the foyer she paused. Her father's coat still hung on the rack. His boots stood by the door, dusted with dried mud from yesterday's inspection of the fields. The smell of pipe tobacco still lingered, faint but unmistakable. For a fleeting moment she imagined slipping back into her bedroom and pretending none of this was happening, but only for a moment. The memory of the previous night pushed the hesitation away. She had been searching for a sewing needle in her mother's old chest when she found the documents, yellowed papers, folded tightly, tied with a faded ribbon. She had not expected to find anything significant, but the words on the papers had burned themselves into her mind. Her mother's birthplace was listed as a small estate known for quietly selling mixed-race children to wealthy planters in the South. Her mother had been one of them. And by the twisted laws of the South, if your mother had been enslaved, even partly, you were enslaved too, no matter how white you passed, no matter how rich your father was. It had been hidden her entire life, hidden because exposure would have meant ruin. In that moment, everything she thought she knew about herself had shattered. She left the house and stepped into the icy air. The fog swallowed her quickly, turning the familiar path into a ghostly corridor. Her boots sank into the damp earth as she moved toward the pecan tree. Every few steps she paused, listening for any sign of dogs or footsteps, but the plantation slept deeply, unaware one of its most valuable assets, as the ledgers called Samuel, and by extension, as the law might call her one day, was slipping away. When she reached the clearing, she saw him. Samuel stood with a small pack slung over his shoulder, his breath fogging in the cold. He turned when he heard her approach. Even in the dimness, she could see the worry etched on his face. "You're late," he whispered, but his voice held relief, not reproach. "I had to be careful," she said. He scanned her from head to toe, checking for signs she had been hurt or followed. "We can still turn back," he murmured. "Once we take that first step past the property line, there's no undoing it. I know. Your father will send riders. I know. He might come himself. I know. Then why are you not afraid?" he asked quietly. Eleanor stepped closer. "Who says I'm not?" He stared at her, the question hanging between them like the edge of a cliff. "You sure about this?" he asked finally. She took a long breath that seemed to pull the entire night sky into her lungs. "Samuel, if I stay here, I will suffocate. If I leave without you, I will die. If I leave with you, I may still die, but at least I will have chosen my life, not accepted the one they forced on me." He blinked, stunned by the strength in her voice. Then he nodded and handed her a second pack he had prepared. "We follow the tree line," he said softly. "Stay low. We reach the river by sunrise." They moved together, their footsteps in sync, each step erasing the life behind them. The fog began to thin as they neared the old wooden fence marking the edge of the Whitford property. Beyond it lay the world her father had always warned her about, a world he painted as wild, cruel, and unforgiving. But the world behind her had proven far crueler. As she placed her hands on the fence, her heart slammed painfully against her ribs. This was the moment, this line of rotting wood and moss, that separated Eleanor Whitford, the plantation daughter, from Eleanor the fugitive. She hesitated only for a breath. Samuel climbed over smoothly and reached his hand out to her from the other side. She stared at his hand, the hand of a man she'd be, and taught to pity, to own, to command, and felt none of those things. She felt only the truth she had never dared to speak aloud. She trusted him more than anyone she had ever known. She placed her hand in his. He pulled her over with steady strength. When her feet touched the ground on the other side, the world seemed to expand around her. For the first time in her life, she was outside her father's reach, and yet the terror of what they had done washed over her like ice water. "Are you still with me?" Samuel asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Then we run." And so they did. They ran through the trees, their breath burning, their hearts pounding in perfect rhythm. They ran until the plantation was only a memory dissolving behind the fog. They ran until the sky began to lighten, until the world shifted from blue-black to gray. Behind them, far in the distance, a dog barked. Eleanor's lungs seized with fear, but she did not stop because for the first time in her life, running toward danger felt safer than staying still. The forest swallowed them within minutes, the trees rising like dark pillars on either side, as Samuel guided Eleanor deeper into the wilderness. The ground was damp, the leaves wet from the night's frost, and every step left a print that could betray them if anyone followed too closely. Samuel stopped often, listening, watching, scanning the shadows with the instinct of a man who had spent his life being hunted even when standing still. Eleanor, though exhausted from fear and cold, matched his pace without complaint. She had never walked this far in her life, much less sprinted through darkness with the weight of a bag cutting into her shoulder. But fear became fuel, and adrenaline made her light on her feet. The first mile passed in silence, except for the sound of their breaths. The sky was slowly turning the color. A bruised peach, signaling dawn, was creeping closer. They needed to be off the open paths before the light found them. Samuel finally slowed near a cluster of fallen logs, motioning for her to crouch. Eleanor dropped beside him, her breath heaving. He looked at her carefully. "You holdin' up?" "Barely," but she nodded. He pointed ahead. "There's an abandoned tobacco barn another half-mile north. We'll hide there till the dogs lose the scent." The mention of dogs made her blood freeze. "Do you think they've been released yet?" she whispered. Samuel listened again to the wind. "Maybe not. But they will. Mr. Whitford don't play when it comes to property." The way he said the last word, quiet, controlled, but full of bitterness, made Eleanor's stomach twist. She had grown up hearing that word used freely, applied not only to objects, but to bodies, lives, futures. But hearing Samuel speak it now felt like a slap to the belief she had accepted without question. "Samuel," she whispered, I'm sorry for all the years I didn't understand." He didn't look at her. "Ain't time for that right now." She nodded, ashamed but grateful he didn't push the conversation further. They continued moving, Samuel always a few steps ahead, pushing branches aside, checking the ground for prints, making sure Eleanor didn't trip on roots hidden by the underbrush. The deeper they went, the thicker the forest became, until even the faint glow of early morning was muffled. At last they reached the barn. It was nothing more than a leaning structure with half its boards missing, the roof sagging like it was tired of standing. But it was shelter, and it was hidden. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, dust, and the faint memory of tobacco. Samuel closed the door behind them, though it didn't fully latch. He pushed crates against it anyway. "Get some rest," he murmured. Eleanor leaned against the wall, her legs trembling violently now that she had stopped moving. Samuel sat across from her, eyes fixed on the door. Even here, in a place no one had entered in years, he couldn't relax. "Do you ever sleep?" she whispered. "Not when I'm on the run." She swallowed. "Have you run before?" He lifted his eyes to hers, calm but with a flicker of something deep. "Thought about it more times than I can count, even tried once. They caught me by the river. I was 14. She felt a sharp ache in her chest. "What did they do?" He looked away. The usual. As if whippings and chains were household routines, as if suffering was simply another word for morning chores. "I'm sorry," she said again, helplessly. His voice stayed steady. "Don't be sorry for something you didn't do. Be sorry for something you helped stop." She nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning. They remained silent, both lost in their thoughts, until Samuel leaned his head back against the wall. "We got a long road ahead, Miss Eleanor." "Just Eleanor," she whispered. He hesitated. "All right then, Eleanor." The way he said her name, without the stiffness, without the distance everyone else used, made her chest warm despite the cold. For a while they sat listening to the forest breathe. Birds began to stir. A distant river rushed somewhere beyond the trees. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound that made them both stiffen, dogs barking far away. Eleanor's heart thudded painfully. Samuel stood and peered through the cracks between the boards. "They're out," he whispered. "They're trackin'." Fear clawed up Eleanor's throat. Samuel knelt in front of her. "We'll be okay," he said, though she could hear the effort behind the words. "They ain't gonna find us today. The river's close enough. Once we cross, they'll lose the scent." "But what if—" "Eleanor," he said firmly. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "We ain't gonna get caught today." He spoke with a certainty she desperately needed. They waited in the barn for hours, silent, tense, alert. The barking faded, then returned, then faded again. Each time it drew near, Eleanor's hands tightened around her cloak. By midday, sunlight streaked through the broken roof. Samuel stood and tested the door. Time to move. They left the barn quietly, sticking to the shadowy parts of the forest. The river was closer now, its rushing sound growing louder as they walked. As they traveled, the forest seemed to shift into a different world. Pine needles blanketed the ground. Ferns brushed against their legs. Strange bird calls echoed overhead. Eleanor felt the disorientation of stepping into an unfamiliar universe, one governed not by rules and punishments but by instinct and survival. After an hour, they reached the river. It was wider than Eleanor expected, fast-flowing with icy water. Crossing would be dangerous. Samuel scanned the banks. "We can use that fallen log," he said, pointing to a massive tree lying halfway across the water. "Hold tight to the branches. Move slow." Eleanor's legs shook again. "What if I fall? You won't." "But if I do, you won't." She took a deep breath. "All right." Samuel stepped onto the log first, testing each part for stability. Once he was sure, he reached for her hand. Eleanor placed her foot on the slick bark, heart hammering. The river roared beneath them. Every step felt like a battle. Halfway across, her foot slipped. She gasped, gripping Samuel's hand with a strangled cry. Her other foot dangled over the rushing water. "Don't look down," Samuel said, steady as a rock. "Look at me." She did. And slowly shaking, she pulled herself upright. They reached the other side, wet, chilled, but alive. On that bank, Samuel Crow. Ched pressed his hand into the mud. Then he smiled. A rare, small smile. "No tracks," he said. Water washed him out. Eleanor let out a shaky breath of relief. They continued deeper into the woods until Samuel finally stopped at a patch of land shaded by thick branches. "We rest here till night," he said. The ground was cold, but they spread blankets from Samuel's pack. Eleanor lay down, her muscles crying with exhaustion. Samuel sat beside her, sharpening a small blade he carried. "Samuel," she whispered. "Do you trust these people you said we'll meet? The ones on this network?" He paused. "Trust ain't the right word, but they hate slavery, hate your father's world. They'll help if they can." She looked at the trees swaying overhead. Why do they help? What do they gain? Samuel thought for a moment. Some do it because they think it's God's work. Some do it out of guilt. Some do it because they lost someone. Some just because it's right. He looked at her. But none of them gain anything but trouble. And still they help? Still they help. Silence stretched between them as Eleanor tried to understand that kind of bravery. Her world had never taught her such things. Her world rewarded cruelty and punished conscience. Maybe that's why she had never belonged in it. As dusk approached, they resumed their journey. And this part of the road was stranger than anything Eleanor had ever imagined. The safe houses were not houses at all, sometimes. They were cellars, sometimes barns, sometimes the hollow under a porch. They traveled through forgotten paths, marked only by subtle signs hidden in trees. A circle carved into bark meant danger. A cross meant food. A slash meant walk alone, which Samuel always obeyed. Their first stop was a farmhouse owned by a widow named Mrs. O'Malley. She opened the door only a crack, her eyes narrowing at the sigh of Eleanor's pale face beside Samuel's. "You sure she's not a spy?" the woman asked Samuel bluntly. "She's running same as me," Samuel said. Mrs. O'Malley examined Eleanor with a hard, skeptical stare. Eleanor felt exposed under it, like every privilege she had ever lived with was glaring through her cloak. Finally, the widow nodded. "Come in, but don't touch the curtains." Inside, she gave them bread and water, then motioned to a set of loose floorboards. "You hide till nightfall. Riders passed earlier. They'll be back." Eleanor climbed into the cramped space, heart pounding. Samuel followed, lowering the boards above them. It was suffocatingly dark, and the small space forced them close, so close she could feel Samuel's breath. At one point, footsteps sounded overhead. A man's voice cursed. A dog sniffed. Eleanor's hand trembled so violently she accidentally brushed Samuel's. He covered her hand with his, steadying her. The riders left. Much later that night, Mrs. O'Malley lifted the boards. "Coast is clear. Go. Fast." They slipped out into the night and continued down a narrow dirt path lit only by moonlight. Eleanor's legs ached beyond anything she had ever felt. Samuel walked slightly ahead, alert to any movement. They traveled like this for days, moving through forests, fields, swamps, hidden roads known only to the few brave souls who risked everything to dismantle the machinery of slavery one person at a time. Along the way, Eleanor experienced things no plantation daughter was ever meant to see. People hiding in root cellars, children fleeing under blankets, families who had lost half their members to slave catchers but still helped strangers. Every story chipped away at her old world, revealing a new one beneath, raw, painful, human. Each night they rested in a new hiding place. Each day brought them closer to the Ohio border. And with every mile, the strange truth grew clearer. Freedom was not a destination, it was motion, it was risk, it was choosing to walk into the unknown instead of staying where certainty meant cruelty. And Eleanor, once so sheltered she had never walked alone outside the plantation gates, was learning to walk boldly into the dark step by step beside a man who had spent his whole life running from the world she had once been part of. Their journey had only begun, but in the forests of Tennessee, on hidden paths mapped only by memory and desperation, something was transforming inside her, a courage she didn't know she possessed, and a bond with Samuel that danger only made stronger. Night travel had become so routine that Eleanor no longer knew what day it was. The world had shrunk into two states of existence, the fear that lived inside darkness and the relief that flickered briefly at dawn when they found hiding places. After days of moving through backwoods and forgotten trails, their clothes were soaked with mud, their boots torn, and their bodies worn down to the edges of endurance. Yet something stronger than exhaustion kept them going. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was the promise Samuel kept repeating, that north of the Ohio River the law no longer owned him. Or maybe it was simply momentum. If they stopped, they would be swallowed. By the time they reached the foothills of Kentucky, the terrain had changed. The forest thinned and widened into rolling slopes covered in frost. Crisp winter air bit at their lungs. The land felt open, too open, and Eleanor knew Samuel felt it too. In the forests of Tennessee, they had been hidden even when walking in daylight. Here, a person running could be seen from distances that made the skin crawl. On the night they reached the narrow road leading toward Lexington, the wind was sharp and biting. The moon shone too brightly. Every shadow looked like a rider. Samuel kept turning back, scanning behind them. "We need shelter," he murmured. Eleanor nodded, even though her lips had turned numb from cold. They had walked nearly 20 miles since sunset. Her feet burned, her fingers tingled from the cold, and a dull ache settled deep in the muscles of her back. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the tightening look on Samuel's face, the way he moved lower to the ground, listening for distant hoofbeats. Just after midnight, they spotted a cabin at the bottom of a small slope. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. Samuel raised a hand to stop, her eyes narrowing. "That's not one of the safe places?" Eleanor whispered. "No," he said, "but we ain't got many choices tonight." "How do we know who lives there? We don't—" He crouched behind a fallen tree, studying the house for several long minutes. Eleanor hugged her coat tightly. The cold was becoming unbearable. When Samuel finally spoke again, he did so in a soft, warning tone. "Don't speak unless I say, and stay behind me." She nodded, heart hammering. They approached the cabin slowly. A lantern glowed faintly through one window. Samuel knocked once, firm but not loud enough to wake the entire valley. A moment passed, then the door cracked open just enough for an old man's pale eye to appear. He held a rifle, the barrel peeking through the opening. "Who are you?" the man asked, voice gravelly with suspicion. "A traveler," Samuel said calmly. "We're cold. We need a place to warm up." The man's eye drifted to Eleanor. She lowered her gaze immediately, partly from fear and partly to keep him from seeing how desperate she felt. "You two together?" he asked. "Yes," Samuel replied plainly. The man grunted. "You know what they do to folks helping runaways?" Samuel didn't flinch, but Eleanor felt the weight of the man's stare. He knew he wasn't fooled by the coats or the bags or the way Samuel spoke with measured respect. He knew exactly what kind of people they were. "We only need an hour by your fire," Samuel said. "We'll be gone before dawn." The old man studied him for another long moment, then sighed heavily. The door opened wider. "Get in, quick." Eleanor followed Samuel inside. Warmth hit her like a wave. Her knees nearly buckled. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, illuminating walls cluttered with tools, jars, and worn blankets. The smell of stew lingered faintly in the air. The man set his rifle aside and motioned toward the fire. "Warm yourselves, but I ain't making promises beyond that." Samuel nodded. "Thank you." Eleanor sat near the flames, stretching her frozen hands toward the heat. Samuel remained standing for a few moments, watching the man with the same wary eyes he used for riders and barking dogs. "What's your name?" the old man asked. "Samuel, and hers?" "Eleanor." The old man huffed. "You sound educated." Samuel said nothing. "I ain't judgin'," the man added quickly, "just observin'. I've been seeing all kinds on this road lately, too many these days." Samuel finally lowered himself beside the fire, though not too close to Eleanor, as if keeping space allowed him to stay alert. "You live alone?" Samuel asked. The old man nodded. My wife died 5 winters ago. Kids moved west. I stayed for her sake. He rubbed his hands together. What's your plan? To get north, Samuel said. To Ohio? The man shook his head. Risky time. Too many patrols. Every time is risky, Samuel replied. The man studied him. You got a good chance of making it. You're cautious. You pay attention. Then his gaze shifted to Eleanor. But her? She ain't used to running. She ain't built for rough travel. Eleanor stiffened. Samuel's voice sharpened slightly. She's stronger than you think. The old man held up a hand. Didn't say she wasn't. But look at her. Anyone sees a girl like that with a man like you, they'll know exactly what's happening. Won't even need proof. Eleanor lowered her head again, heat rising to her cheeks not from shame, but from the sheer discomfort of being seen so clearly. After a long silence, the old man spoke again. I'll give you food, and I'll point you to a path that don't go through the main road. But I ain't keeping you here more than an hour. Patrols sweep the valley. Samuel nodded once. We understand. The man ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. Eleanor's hands trembled as she accepted hers. They ate quickly, silently. The warmth of the food brought life back into her fingers. Halfway through the meal, the old man leaned his elbows on the table. You from a plantation? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Yes. The old man looked at Eleanor. And you? She hesitated. I was raised on one. He nodded slowly, as if fitting puzzle pieces together. You running from your father? Eleanor froze. Samuel tensed. The man's gaze softened slightly. You don't need to speak. I know the look of someone who's left behind more than a house. The fire crackled loudly in the silence that followed. When they finished eating, Samuel stood. We should go. Thank you for your help. The man handed him a lantern. Follow the creek for 2 miles. You'll hit a ridge. On the other side's a path no patrol uses. Hard walk, but safe. Samuel took the lantern with a respectful nod. Thank you. The old man watched them put on their coats. Travel fast, he said. Dawn will bring trouble. They stepped into the cold again, the door closing softly behind them. Eleanor exhaled a shaky breath. He knew. He didn't turn us in, Samuel replied. That's what matters. They walked toward the creek, lantern lighting the path. The air was thick with frost, their breaths clouding the night. But something felt different now. Not safer, not easier, just changed. Eleanor had expected fugitives, safe houses, fear, and pursuit, but she had not expected the people in between, those who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, yet chose to help strangers in the dark. As they climbed the ridge, the world widened below them, a vast stretch of fields, forests, and winding waterways glinting silver under the moon. It felt like standing at the edge of a map she had never seen. Samuel paused at the top, scanning the horizon. We're getting close, he murmured. 2 more days if the roads stay quiet. Eleanor sank onto a fallen tree, rubbing her aching legs. Is the river dangerous? All rivers are dangerous, Samuel said, but this one's guarded. They watch it day and night. She shivered. Will we try to cross at night? Night's safer, Samuel said, but we'll need help. There's a man named Whitaker along the border. Folks say he's reliable. Does he help people like us? He helps people. That's enough. They began walking again, following the ridge as it curved north toward the hidden path. Hours passed in slow, careful steps. The wind picked up. At times it howled through the branches with a sound so human it felt like weeping. They reached a cluster of dense pines and settled beneath them, sheltered from the wind. Samuel unfolded a blanket and motioned for Eleanor to sit. You sleep, he said softly. I'll keep watch. She wanted to argue. He hadn't slept in days, but exhaustion won. She lowered herself onto the blanket. Before sleep claimed her, she heard Samuel speak quietly. I ain't letting anything happen to you, not on my watch. She didn't open her eyes, and I'm not letting anything happen to you either. Samuel was silent for a long time, then a soft reply. We'll get there, one way. Or another. Eleanor drifted into sleep with those words circling her mind. By late afternoon the next day they reached Whitaker's place, a small stone house near the riverbank. Samuel approached cautiously, tapping the door twice, pausing, then tapping once more, the signal he'd been told. The door opened slowly. A tall, weathered man stepped out, eyes sharp, jaw unshaven. He looked at Samuel first, then Eleanor, then back at Samuel. You're late, he said. We had trouble, Samuel replied. Whitaker grunted. There's always trouble. Get inside. The moment the door shut, Eleanor felt the world tighten. This wasn't like the widow's home or the old man's cabin. Whitaker's place had a different energy, structured, efficient, methodical, like a station, like a checkpoint, "River's high," Whitaker said, "and patrols are thick, but I got a man taking 3 others across tonight. You'll go with them." "Thank you," Samuel said. Whitaker looked Eleanor over. "She'll slow you down." Samuel stepped slightly in front of her. "She's coming, and she's strong." Whitaker held his stare. "If she falls behind, I'm not waiting. I've seen enough die on this river." "I won't fall behind," Eleanor said quietly. Whitaker gave a dismissive shrug. "We'll see." They rested in the cellar until nightfall. More runaways arrived, 2 men and a woman, each more worn than the last. One man had a cut across his forehead. The woman clutched a small bundle wrapped in cloth, a child's shoe. No child, just the shoe. The sight of it made Eleanor's throat close. When the moon was high, Whitaker led them out the back door and down a narrow path toward the river. The sound of rushing water grew louder with each step. Torches flickered on the distant shore, patrols sweeping the banks. Whitaker pointed to an old flat-bottomed boat dragged into the shadows. A man stood beside it, face hidden by a scarf. "This is Hale," Whitaker whispered. "He'll take you across." Hale nodded once, then motioned for them to load in quickly. The boat rocked as they stepped inside. Samuel positioned himself near the front, keeping Eleanor between himself and the center. The river roared beneath them as Hale pushed the boat off the bank. They drifted into darkness. Eleanor's heart pounded. Samuel leaned close. "Stay low. Don't make a sound." Midway across, torches flared on the opposite bank. Voices shouted. Dogs barked. Hale cursed under his breath and rowed harder. The river current grabbed them, tugging violently. Water splashed inside. The boat lurched. Eleanor grabbed the side, knuckles white. "Samuel, I'm here," he said, gripping her arm. The voices grew louder. "Row!" Whitaker hissed from the shadowed bank behind them. "Row!" The boat surged forward. A shout rang across the water. A lantern lifted high. "They see us," Samuel whispered. Hale rowed with desperate strength. The boat cut through the water inch by inch, the sound of patrols growing fainter behind them. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the boat scraped against the northern shore. Samuel grabbed Eleanor's hand and pulled her onto solid ground. Hale signaled for them to run. They sprinted into the darkness as torchlight flickered wildly behind them. When they reached the safety of the trees north of the river, Eleanor collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. Samuel knelt beside her, breath ragged. "We made it," he whispered. "We're on free land." But Eleanor wasn't thinking about safety. She was thinking about what came next, because crossing the river was not the end. It was the beginning of everything they didn't yet understand. By the time Eleanor and Samuel stumbled into Ohio, the world seemed to move in slow motion around them. 6 months of running had stripped them to bone, spirit, body, breath. Cold had carved lines into Eleanor's face that didn't belong on a 19-year-old girl. Samuel's hands had hardened into something like carved stone, cracked and bleeding from constant travel, constant lifting, constant climbing, constant shielding of Eleanor when danger came too close. But the moment their boots touched the muddy outskirts of the abolitionist settlement near Ripley, something shifted. The air felt different, lighter, not free, not yet, but less poisoned than the land they'd come from. They approached the first house with caution. Samuel had learned early in life that not every white man who claimed to be against slavery was willing to risk anything to act on that belief. And Eleanor, though exhausted, understood the stakes better than ever. She kept her hood low, face half hidden, shoulders trembling from hunger. The house stood small but sturdy, with a thin line of smoke drifting from the chimney and the faint smell of bread floating on the breeze. It felt impossible that such peace could exist after miles of forest, swamps, and fear, but still Samuel knocked, once, twice, then stepped back, positioning himself slightly in front of Eleanor. A thin, sharp-eyed woman opened the door. She studied them with the kind of gaze that could peel a person open without a single question. Her dress was plain, her hair pinned back carelessly, her hands dusted with flour. She recognized immediately what kind of travelers stood before her. Travelers who kept looking over their shoulders. Travelers whose clothes were torn in ways only flight could create. Travelers carrying the haunted look of those who had slept in trees and barns for months. Before Samuel could speak, she said softly, "Come inside quickly. The evening patrol rides this road." They obeyed without protest. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen nearly made Eleanor cry. Heat touched her fingers like something alive. The woman ushered them to the fireplace, then called for her husband, a tall man with a face shaped by equal parts kindness and weariness. His name was Mr. Dandridge, and he introduced himself quietly as though even sound could draw danger. His wife, Margaret, set down 2 steaming bowls of stew that felt like miracles. It was the first warm meal they'd had in days. Samuel ate with slow discipline. Eleanor devoured hers so quickly she nearly gagged. Margaret refilled her bowl before she could apologize. After a while, when their hands had stopped trembling and their breathing no longer came in ragged gasps, Mr. Dandridge brought out a battered map and unrolled it on the table. His voice remained low, every sentence measured. "You've traveled far, too far to be bounty riders, and too desperate to be runaways without a heavy reason." Samuel hesitated. He'd grown used to silence being his shield. But this road was different. This house was different. These people weren't asking out of curiosity. They were gauging danger. If Samuel gave the wrong answer, they'd put him and Eleanor out immediately, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. One wrong mouth, one wrong detail, one neighbor with loose gossip, and the entire settlement could face raids. He finally said, "We're headed for a free community further north, but we needed rest. We have been hunted from Tennessee." Eleanor, still weak, added nothing. Mr. Dandridge nodded, studying the map. "You've done well to survive this long. But before we risk ourselves, our neighbors, and the network, we have to know why. There are many who flee, but few who flee this far unless the ground behind them is burning." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It wasn't skepticism, just procedure. Samuel looked at Eleanor. She gave the slightest nod, though her face paled. She had Kay. Now this moment would come. She had known 6 months earlier, when she tore open the small wooden box hidden in her father's study, and discovered the yellowed papers inside. Papers that carried the weight of a secret capable of destroying families, reputations, legacies, everything her father had been building for decades. Samuel spoke first. "She isn't who they think she is." Mr. Dandridge blinked slowly. "Explain." Eleanor forced herself upright. Her voice came out thin, but steady enough. "My mother was born enslaved." The room went silent. Even the fire seemed to settle. Samuel continued. "Her father, the master, never recorded that truth in the county book, but someone else did, a midwife, and a merchant who sold her first." He nodded toward Eleanor gently. "Her father hid it, raised her mother as a white girl, married her off young, never told anyone." Eleanor swallowed hard. "When my mother died, he burned most of the papers, but not all. He thought he destroyed them. He didn't. When I found them, everything changed." Mr. Dandridge exhaled sharply. Margaret covered her mouth in shock. "You're saying," Margaret whispered, "that by Southern law—" "Yes," Eleanor's voice cracked. "I am legally black, which means I am legally property." The word cut the air like a blade. Margaret's eyes glistened. She reached for Eleanor's hand, but stopped, unsure, then gently took it. "Child, you must have been terrified." Eleanor let out a breath that trembled like something breaking. "I didn't know who to trust. My father, if he discovered I knew, could have me sold to protect the plantation's name. I had already seen him sell cousins and half-siblings he fathered with enslaved women. Why would I be any different?" Samuel added quietly. "They would have taken her quickly, and no one would question it." Mr. Dandridge rubbed his chin. His voice softened but carried he weight of understanding. "So you ran. And you chose to run with the one man your father would never suspect could outsmart him." Samuel said nothing, but the truth hung between them. Margaret took a long breath. "You've both risked everything, and now you're here." The Dandridges offered them a place to sleep in the small room behind the kitchen, just until they could arrange passage further north. Eleanor and Samuel slept on separate pallets on the floor, but sleep itself felt like a luxury. Samuel woke constantly, trained by instinct to detect every sound. Eleanor dreamed of papers burning, dogs barking, her father's voice roaring through the halls. At dawn, the settlement's guide arrived. He was a quiet man named Jonas Tate, known for helping dozens flee across the river and further into safe territory. Jonas listened to their story with narrowed eyes, disbelief, and then understanding. But he saw something else in Eleanor, an uncertainty, a shaking fear not just from exhaustion, but from identity itself. "You're not running only from men," Jonas said gently. "You're running from the truth of who you are." Eleanor lowered her eyes. Jonas asked one question that changed everything. "What do you want to become when you're no longer running?" The question stunned her. Nobody had ever asked what she wanted, not in Mississippi, not in the months of flight, not even in the moments she risked death. Survival had been her only horizon. She whispered, "Someone who gets to live without lying?" Jonas nodded. "Then that is the direction we will take." Over the next weeks, Mr. Dandridge coordinated with other abolitionists. It became clear that Eleanor's situation required more than safety. She needed proof of her lineage, proof her father had erased. Without it, even in the North, someone could challenge her freedom. Abduction gangs, legal under fugitive laws, could rag her south claiming she was a runaway slave. They needed documentation. Jonas knew a lawyer in Cincinnati who had helped dozens contest illegal enslavement. He agreed to investigate Eleanor's mother's origins. It took nearly 2 months for him to return. Those 2 months were transformative. Eleanor learned to cook for the first time, not because a servant or enslaved woman handed her a plate, but because she wanted to feed the children in the settlement schoolhouse. Samuel helped repair roofs, chop wood, and build sheds with other free black men who treated him with a respect he had never experienced. Eleanor saw how people lived when class, race, and ancestry weren't the sole forces that defined every interaction. Samuel watched her change, her shoulders easing, her smiles returning, her voice growing steady. But he also saw the shadows that lingered when she sat alone. The weight of a life uprooted never leaves easily. At last the lawyer arrived. He carried a small leather satchel, the kind used by people who live in documents and truths. He sat Eleanor down with Margaret and Samuel close by. "I traced your mother's birth records," he began. "The midwife's log survived in a county far from your father's reach. So did a church baptism entry." Eleanor's hands tightened. "But there is more," he continued. "Your mother's mother, your grandmother, did not die in the South as your father claimed. She escaped in 1817. She is alive." The room gasped. Eleanor's breath left her body entirely. "Alive," she whispered. "Living in Pennsylvania," the lawyer said. "A free woman. She has been searching for information about her daughter for decades. She believed the child, your mother, died young." Eleanor's tears came silently, sliding down her cheeks as though her body had no strength left to resist them. Margaret held her hands. Samuel knelt beside her, voice low A. "ND full. You have family?" For weeks, Eleanor had imagined that freedom meant simply the absence of chains, the absence of pursuit. But now she realized freedom could also mean belonging, something she had never truly felt in the plantation house where she grew up as a secret waiting to be exposed. The lawyer continued, "Your grandmother is willing to take you in. She sent a letter expressing her joy, though she thinks you might not believe she exists. She asked for Samuel's safe passage as well." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "She doesn't even know him. She says she knows desperation and love when she sees it." The lawyer replied softly. The settlement organized funds, coordinated maps, and prepared the journey north. When the day came for them to leave, the entire community gathered to wish them well. Margaret pressed a loaf of warm bread into Eleanor's hands. The children hugged Samuel's legs. Jonas gave them a folded paper with directions written in code. They rode north, not as fugitives, but as something closer to a young couple walking toward a new world. 6 months earlier, they had been hunted. Now they were carried by hope. And as Ohio's forests thinned into the open farmlands of Pennsylvania, Eleanor felt a weight lifting, a weight she had carried since the day she discovered her mother's truth. Ahead waited a grandmother she had never imagined, a family she didn't know existed, and a place where her identity was not a crime. Behind her, the house in Ohio remained the moment where the truth finally broke open and where the life she had been forced into finally began to fall away. Spring arrived like a slow breath over the northern hills, softening the frozen rivers, stirring the trees awake, and brushing the world with colors that felt almost unreal after the gray brutality of winter. Eleanor and Samuel had survived harsher seasons, but nothing prepared them for the feeling of walking northward without fear biting at their heels. It was the first time in months that the crunch of leaves beneath their boots did not sound like warnings. The distant echo of a horse did not signal danger, and every stranger's silhouette did not set their hearts hammering. Yet even as the road grew gentler, the weight of what lay ahead pressed inward. Eleanor was about to meet a grandmother she never knew existed, a living branch of her mother's history long hidden, long denied. Samuel walked slightly ahead of her, scanning the road with the instinct of someone who had been hunted high entire life. But he glanced back at her often, watching the turmoil in her eyes. She carried excitement, fear, grief, and something deeper, a sense that the pieces of her identity were finally converging into something whole. The journey to Pennsylvania took weeks, though the fugitive slave, Act still threatened anyone without proper documents. The abolitionist network had prepared their passage carefully. Safe houses dotted their route, each run by people who treated Samuel with dignity and treated Eleanor as though her past did not define her future. They slept in barns when necessary, in attics when safer, and in open fields when no shelter could be trusted. Through it all, Eleanor held tight to the letter from her grandmother, written in shaky, careful script that betrayed age but carried a strength of spirit unmistakable. "My child's child," the letter began, "I have waited my whole life to know even one breath of her beyond the grave." Eleanor read those words again and again until she nearly knew them by heart. Samuel noticed the way she folded that letter like something sacred. One evening, as they rested in the loft of a Quaker barn, he finally asked, "What frightens you most?" Eleanor turned the paper over in her hands. "That she'll look at me and see my mother, and all the pain that came with her loss." Samuel lay beside her, hands behind his head, eyes focused on the dim ceiling above them. "Or she'll look at you and see a miracle she never thought she'd live to witness." Eleanor smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. "And you? What frightens you?" He paused. "That freedom will feel like an unfamiliar room. I've spent my life learning how to survive inside a trap. I don't know yet how to live outside one." She reached for his hand. Samuel didn't pull away. The next morning, with the sun rising golden over the barn's slanted roof, they resumed air journey with renewed strength. Each mile north felt like a step into their own unfolding story, one written not by plantation owners or overseers or men with ledgers, but by their own choices and courage. When they finally crossed into Pennsylvania, Eleanor felt it physically, as though something heavy slipped off her shoulders and faded behind them. They were in a free state. Bounty hunters still roamed illegally, but here the law was no longer bent entirely against them. For Samuel, the realization brought tears he didn't expect. He hid them at first, turning away under the pretense of adjusting his pack, but Eleanor saw the way his shoulders shook. She walked up behind him and rested her palm between his shoulder blades. "You made it," she whispered. "Not by accident, not by luck. You made it." He let the tears fall then, quiet, raw, unfiltered. It took 2 more days to reach the small Pennsylvania town where Eleanor's grandmother lived. By the time they walked down the narrow dirt road leading toward a modest, vine-covered cottage, Eleanor's knees were trembling so badly she thought she might collapse. Samuel kept one hand close to her back, steadying her without drawing attention. The cottage's windows glowed with lamplight. A cane leaned against the front step. A pot of flowers sat by the door, petals fluttering gently in the spring breeze. Samuel murmured, "Ready?" "No," she whispered. Then, after a breath, "Yes." He knocked. For a long moment there was only silence, then slow footsteps, a bolt sliding, the creak of old hinges. The door opened to reveal a woman with silver hair wrapped in a blue cloth, her skin lined with age, her spine stiffened by years of work and worry. Her eyes were sharp, dark pools that held stories stretching back decades. She studied them both, her gaze moving with a tremor that betrayed something far more powerful than fear. Eleanor?" she asked softly. Her voice cracked on the name, as though speaking it tugged open a wound she had sealed for survival. Eleanor couldn't speak. She only nodded, tears flooding her eyes. The old woman reached out a trembling hand. "Come here, child." Eleanor stepped forward and fell into her grandmother's arms. The woman held her tightly, fiercely, as if afraid Eleanor might vanish like the daughter she had lost so many years ago. Eleanor wept against her shoulder, and the old woman wept with her, their grief and joy tangled into something too deep for language. Samuel looked away, giving them privacy, though the moment touched something deep within him. When Eleanor finally pulled back, her grandmother cupped her face in both hands. "You look like her," she whispered. "Lord, you look so much like her. But stronger, wiser. You came so far." Eleanor wiped her cheeks. "I didn't come alone." Her grandmother turned. Samuel then. He straightened instinctively, unsure of how he would be received. But she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You must be the young man who carried my granddaughter through the fire." Samuel bowed his head respectfully. "I just helped her survive, ma'am." Her smile widened gently. "Don't lie to me, child. I can see it in your eyes. You protected her. You watched over her. You shared her road." She motioned them inside. "Any soul who helped my blood escape that darkness is welcome in my home." The cottage was simple but warm, filled with handmade quilts, dried herbs hanging near the windows, and a table scarred by decades of use. A faded painting of Eleanor's mother, much younger, smiling shyly, hung above the mantel. Eleanor froze when she saw it. She approached with slow steps, fingers trembling as she traced the outline of her mother's painted cheek. "I never knew this existed," she breathed. Her grandmother exhaled. "She wa 16 when that was painted, before your father's world swallowed her." Eleanor's chest tightened. Samuel moved closer, placing a hand lightly on her back. That night her grandmother told stories Eleanor had never heard, stories Samuel listened to as though they were sacred. She told them about the plantation where she herself had been born enslaved, the daring escape she made north with the help of abolitionists, the child she left behind because she had no choice, and the years she spent searching for any sign that her daughter had survived. "I prayed every night," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Prayed the Lord would let me see her again. He didn't, but he sent me you." Eleanor cried again, not out of sadness this time, but because for the first time in her life, she felt the roots of her own history, stretching beneath her feet instead of being erased by someone else's hand. Samuel helped her grandmother clean dishes after dinner, listening quietly as she told him about the free black communities nearby, the jobs available for skilled men, the schools growing stronger every year. He absorbed every detail, every possibility. He had never imagined a world in which he could choose his own work, his own home, his own future. But Eleanor noticed something else. Samuel kept glancing at her across the room, as if unsure whether he belonged in this newly forming chapter of her life. Later, as he stepped outside to gather firewood, she followed him onto the porch. "Samuel," she began softly, "are you thinking about leaving?" He froze. "I don't want to hold you back." She stepped closer. "You've never held me back. You helped me escape a life that wasn't mine. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. You believed me when no one else would." He hesitated. "But this, your family, your new life, it's yours. I don't want to intrude." She reached taking his hand in hers, steady and sure. "Samuel, you're not an intruder. You are the reason I'm alive. You are the reason I found my grandmother. You are the only person I trust completely. Wherever I go, I want you there." Samuel's breath caught. He had been strong in every season of fear, but this frightened him with its tenderness. "Are you certain?" he asked. She nodded. "I am certain of you." He squeezed her hand, a rare smile softening the lines hardship had carved into his face. "Then I'm not going anywhere." Within weeks, Samuel found work with a group of skilled craftsmen, free men who treated him as an equal. Eleanor began teaching reading and writing at the local schoolhouse for children who had escaped the South or been born free in the North. Her grandmother grew stronger with them in her home, laughing more, cooking more, telling stories that filled the nights with the warmth of memory instead of the cold of loss. But the greatest transformation was in Eleanor herself. She learned to breathe without fear, to speak without flinching, to exist without apology. One evening, as spring turned towards summer, she stood in the doorway of her grandmother's cottage, watching Samuel plane a piece of wood in the yard. The golden light caught his face, softening the years of running etched across it. He looked up, sensing her gaze, and smiled. In that moment, Eleanor understood something deeper than she had ever allowed herself to imagine. Freedom wasn't just survival. It wasn't just a place on a map. It was a life built with one's own hands, shaped by choice, strengthened by truth, and shared with someone who had walked through fire beside you. Their journey had begun with desperation, but their future would be built on something lasting, something no bounty hunter, no law, no plantation ledger could ever take from them. Together, they had outrun the world that tried to claim them. Now, at last, they could begin the world they chose.